Most people think Wuthering Heights is a love story, a brooding man, a wild woman, the Yorkshire moors, passion so intense it survives death itself. But here's what the film adaptations never show you. The woman who wrote it was watching her brother destroy himself in real time, drinking himself to death, begging friends for gin in his final letters, hallucinating in the night. And somewhere in the middle of all that darkness, she was writing Heathcliff. This is the real history behind one of the most misunderstood novels ever written. The woman nobody knew. Emily Bronte was born in 1818 in the village of Haworth, Yorkshire, a place so bleak and windswept that the local graveyard water was seeping into the drinking supply. People in Haworth had an average life expectancy of around 25 years. Death was not an abstraction here, it was a neighbour. Emily's father worked as a church rector, and her mother died when Emily was just 3 years old. Two of her older sisters, Maria and Elizabeth, died from tuberculosis before Emily was 7. She grew up in a household where grief was simply the furniture. She was primarily educated at home and spent most of her life in Haworth, aside from 3 months as a pupil at a school Charlotte attended, 6 miserable months as a teacher near Halifax, and sometimes studying in Belgium. By all accounts, she hated every minute of being away. The moors were her world. She walked them every single day, accompanied by her bull mastiff, Keeper. The greatest influence on Wuthering Heights was undoubtedly this landscape. Emily walked almost every day on the moors. She was a familiar sight to the village, setting out on one of her treks. The Brontes had been rambling there since childhood, and Emily knew every inch of this inhospitable, yet beautiful landscape. She barely spoke to strangers. She wrote no diaries that survived. She left behind almost no letters, while Charlotte left behind hundreds of letters that give real insight into her mind. With Emily, you simply don't have any of that. She is perhaps the most mysterious major writer in English literary history. And yet, she wrote the most ferociously alive novel of her century, The Brother in the Shadows. To understand where Wuthering Heights came from, you need to understand Branwell Brontë. Bramwell was the sibling's only brother, and for most of his childhood, he was the one everyone expected to be great. He could write in Greek and Latin from a young age, allegedly with both hands simultaneously, one writing Greek, the other writing Latin. He was charismatic, funny, adored by his sisters. He was also the first of the Bronte children to be published, but somewhere along the way, everything collapsed. Branwell's drinking became problematic in 1845, following a psychological crisis arising from his relationship with his employer's wife, Mrs. Robinson. Whether it was a true affair or an unrequited obsession, scholars still disagree. What's not in dispute is what happened next. Branwell spent those years in a spiral of alcohol and laudanum addiction, humiliated by the failed relationship, cycling through rages and remorse, through binges and vows of sobriety that lasted until they didn't. He haunted the Black Bull pub in Haworth, drinking through the days. His regular boozing there contributed to his early death, masking symptoms of the tuberculosis, which would eventually claim his life in 1848. And in his very final letter, written just days before he died, he begged his friend John to bring him gin, urgently, and to hand it over secretly so his father wouldn't find out. In the mornings, he would saunter out saying, The poor old man and I have had a terrible night of it. He does his best, but it's all over with me. Emily was the one who stayed loyal. She remained close to her brother, loyal to him even as he succumbed to his addictions. While Charlotte's patience wore thin, and Anne channeled her despair into her own novel, Emily kept watch. And she was writing Wuthering Heights at the same time, the real-life tragedy of Branwell's descent into alcoholism following his disastrous affair, no doubt inspired the character of Hindley Earnshaw, Catherine's brother, who spirals into drink and cruelty after losing his wife. When Emily wrote Hindley, she was writing from experience. And Heathcliff? The character of Heathcliff may also have been inspired by Branwell, an alcoholic, an opium addict who would have terrorized Emily and Charlotte during frequent crises of delirium tremens in the years before his death. She wasn't writing a romance. She was writing what she lived. The imaginary world that became real. There's another piece of this story that almost nobody talks about. Long before Emily ever began Wuthering Heights, she and her sister Anne had built an entire world together in their imaginations. They called it Gondal. From childhood, Emily and Anne had shared an imaginative kingdom they called Gondal. It formed the basis for an ongoing story that inspired most of their poems. For Emily, Gondal was almost as real as the world outside her window. At the heart of Gondal was a character named Augusta G. Almeida. Passionate, haughty, untamable. And her tempestuous relationship with a man named Julius Brenzida. These two characters were the direct prototypes for Catherine and Heathcliff. Emily had been rehearsing this story, this specific kind of love, consuming and destructive and impossible, for years before she put it on paper as a novel. Gondal was her laboratory, and then she handed the results to the public, published under a false name, and waited. The world hated it. When Emily Bronte published Wuthering Heights in 1847 under the pseudonym Ellis Bell, outraged Victorian critics deemed it savage, indecent, and immoral. One described it as a compound of vulgar depravity and unnatural horrors. Another reviewer wrote, "There is not in the entire cast of characters a single character which is not utterly hateful or thoroughly contemptible. The novel sold poorly. It was ignored, condemned, and dismissed. Victorian readers found the book shocking in its depiction of passionate, ungoverned love and cruelty. And the work was virtually ignored. Even Emily's sister Charlotte, whose works contained similar Gothic motifs, remained ambivalent toward the unapologetic intensity of her sister's novel. And crucially, the Bronte sisters knew the outside world would not respond favourably to their creative expression. Female authors were often treated less seriously than their male counterparts. Thus, the sisters thought it best to publish under assumed names. Charlotte wrote as Currer Bell, Emily as Ellis Bell, and Anne as Acton Bell. Their real identities remained secret until after Emily and Anne had died. Emily never saw any vindication. She never knew that the book she was mocked for would one day be called one of the greatest novels in the English language. On September 24th, 1848, Branwell died at Haworth Parsonage, most likely due to tuberculosis, aggravated by delirium tremens and opium addiction. Emily caught a chill at his funeral. She refused to see a doctor, characteristically stubborn to the end. 3 months later, in December 1848, she was dead too. She was 30 years old. She never gave a single interview. She never explained her novel. She left almost nothing behind except the book itself. Why it still haunts us. We keep trying to make Wuthering Heights into a love story because that's easier to hold. But Emily Bronte was not writing a love story in any sense Charlotte would have recognised. She was writing about love as a force that operates independently of goodness, of worthiness, of the basic reciprocity we expect relationships to provide. Heathcliff is not redeemed. Cathy is not redeemed. The novel does not offer the reader a character to comfortably inhabit or a moral to extract. What it offers instead is something far more honest. The experience of loving someone whose suffering has made them very hard to love. Someone like Branwell, the very name Heathcliff suggests he's elemental, has sprung up from the landscape itself. Emily's love for the moors was such that they became a character in their own right, symbolic of the natures of Heathcliff and Catherine, and their intense, impossible relationship. There is no other novel quite like it, because there was no other writer quite like Emily Brontë. Someone who lived so quietly, lost so much, imagined so wildly, and left us something so permanently strange. She published one book. She died at 30. The book outlived everything. If this video made you want to pick up Wuthering Heights, or reread it with fresh eyes, I've linked a copy in the description. Fair warning, it's nothing like what you've been told it is, and if you want to go deeper into the lives of the Brontes, and believe me, there is so much more, subscribe. Next time, we're going into the story of Charlotte and what happened after Emily died. I'll see you there.